Good morning, grade 12 students. Welcome back to the 21st Century Literature from the Philippines and the World. I am Ma'am Pagrigan, and I will be teaching Quarter 1, Module 4 for today. This is the historical overview of Philippine literature, particularly the post-colonial period. For the pretest, I want you to answer this. Number 1, what is the modern counterpart of balagtasan? Is it letter A, blogs, letter B, flip-top, letter C, text-to-la, or letter D, spoken words? Number 2, which website contains short articles known as post? A, blog, B, internet, C, social media, and D, web. Number 3, what greatly influenced the 21st century literary forms? A, books, B, culture, C, science, and D, technology. Number 4, which 21st century literary genre addresses issues concerning women that is often depicted in humorous or light-hearted manner? Letter A, chick lit, letter B, flash fiction, letter C, hyperpoetry, and letter D, text-to-la. So I hope you get all those pre-tests correct, but if you got low scores, it's okay because this is just a pre-test. So as we discuss the lesson, you will be having a post-test. So I hope you get all the correct answers there. When we say Philippine literature during the post-colonial period, it is an aftermath of war and a series of foreign invasions in our country. The term post-colonialism was popularized. The lasting impact of imperialism and colonialism had been the utmost concern at this period. American colonial rule already loosened, but its influences and control are still somehow affecting us in terms of social, political, and economic aspects of our country, as manifested in the form of literature produced in various genres. Now, as we go on with our lesson, I want you to name all the presidents of the Philippines. How many presidents have served the Philippines for today? After you have identified all the presidents of the Philippines, you can choose one that you admire most and provide a brief description of your chosen president. So I will be calling somebody to recite. So I hope somebody will recite to answer this. Okay, very good. What's new? Literary works of Filipino authors started to be recognized through the initialization of Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards in 1950 and realization of the need to grant National Artist Awards in 1972 under the former President Ferdinand Marcos. The influences of Spanish and American cultures can be observed. More and more Filipino writers continued to write more fluently using the English language since gaining independence from the Japanese occupation in 1945. In fact, many of the literary works in both Palanca and Order of National Artists were written in English. Most of these were writers that are considered as social realists. Short stories became the most popular form of literary expression, and more novels were published, which mostly dealt with the freedom from both economic and political bondage. Social issues such as poverty, survival, gender inequalities, justice system, and domestic conditions have been prevalent themes and subjects in literature. Moreover, the leaders of the country have to deal with issues concerning economic stability, new and contrasting ideas, and morality, to name a few. The most significant period that greatly influenced many Filipinos is the period of martial law during the Marcos regime. Now, what's on your mind? The writer's experiences, aspirations, and feelings reflect the literary works they produce. Nowadays, people are turning into their social media accounts to express their deep thoughts and feelings. If you were to share something about the current condition of the Philippines to the world in any of your social media account, what would be your status about? So I have here an example of template of the Facebook What's on Your Mind. So can I call somebody to please recite and share something on what will you post about the current condition of the Philippines to the world in your social media? Okay, that's great. Okay, let's go to the post-colonial period. This is 1945 to the present. This is after war. In 1944, Sergio S. Osmeña Sr. assumed the presidency upon the death of Manuel L. Quezon, while the Philippine Commonwealth government was in exile in the U.S. Manuel A. Rojas defeated Sergio S. Osmeña Sr. as the president in April 1946 for the independent Second Republic of the Philippines. Elpidio R. Quirino assumed the remaining term of Rojas when the latter died of a heart attack in 1948. In 1953, Ramon F. Magsaysay was elected as the new president but died in an airplane crash on March 16, 1957. Magsaysay's position was assumed by Carlos P. Garcia, who was re-elected and served until 1961. Diosdado P. Macapagal became the president after Carlos P. Garcia. He changed the date of Philippine independence from July 4, 1946 to June 12, 1986. June 12, 1896. This is from July 4, which is the liberation from America, while June 12, 1896 is the liberation from Spanish by the revolutionists. He also recognized the presidency of Jose P. Laurel. What happened in the Philippines during the martial law period? Ferdinand E. Marcos took office for presidency in 1965, who got re-elected in 1969, making him the first to win two presidential terms. He declared martial law on September 21, 1972, and led the country into what he calls the New Society against lawlessness, which incited a lot of opposition. Marcos was forced to hold an election in 1978 and 1981 to stabilize the country's chaotic condition, where he won again. The death of Benigno Simeon Ninoy Aquino Jr. became the beginning of calling for Marcos' removal. EDSA People Power Revolution, Bloodless Revolution, through the initiative of Maria Corazon C. Aquino and her supporters erupted, which marked a significant national event. Snap election was conducted in 1986, which seated Corazon Aquino, the widow of Benigno Simeon Ninoy Aquino Jr., as the 11th President of the Philippines and ended the 21 years of what many claimed as tyrant rule. Marcos went on exile in Hawaii, where he died on September 28, 1989. The political and economic condition of the Philippines during Cory Aquino's administration was described as chaotic. Monopolization of the agricultural industry took place after the International Monetary Fund forced the Philippines to pay its debt amounting to $27.2 billion, which they claimed to be inherited from Marcos' administration. Fidel B. Ramos, also known as the Centennial President, took office in 1992, where he immediately worked on the country's recovery. He was awarded the Peace Award by UNESCO in his effort to achieve a peace agreement with MILF. Film actor Joseph Ejercito Estrada won the presidency with his pro-poor campaign in 1998, but was ousted in 2001 because of corruption and gambling issues. Maria Gloria Macapagal Arroyo assumed office in 1998, got re-elected, and served until 2010. During her term, many impeachment complaints were filed against her due to corruption and electoral sabotage, where she got hospital arrest for her spinal surgery. Former Senator Benigno Simeon C. Aquino III, aka Pinoy, or Noynoy Aquino, seated as the next president in 2010. Next to him is our current president, Rodrigo Roa Duterte, who is both a lawyer and a politician. And lastly, our present president is President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., President Bongbong Marcos. What are the dimensions of Philippine literature? Filipino writers began to develop new themes, styles, and techniques. The first notable work that appeared right after the Second World War, under the Japanese occupation in the Philippines, is a novel written by Macario Pineda entitled Ginto sa Makiling, which was considered as a narrative of the Philippine social, political, and moral aspects. It was noted for its resemblance to the work of Rizal and more on the work of Balagtas in terms of plot and style. The rise of English writers began after exposure to American language and culture. Although there were still many Filipino writers observed during the vernaculars, Sarvia considers the following factors contributory to the flourishing of Filipino literature. Number 1, establishment of the University of the Philippines in 1908, where English was primarily used as a medium of instruction. Number 2, the founding of the Philippine Writers Association in 1953. And lastly, the establishment of the Carlos Palanca Memorial Award in 1955, to name a few. According to Macan Santos, among the common literary themes in novels and short stories were war experiences, which can be seen in the works of Esteban Habellanos Without Seeing the Dawn, and Edilberto Chempo's Watch in the Night for the English category. While for Filipino literature that used the vernaculars, the works of Lazaro Francisco were profoundly noted for his style associated to Rizal's influence, such as Bayaning Nagpatiwakal in 1932, Sugat sa Alaala in 1950, Maganda pa ang Daigdig in 1956, and Daluyong in 1962. The influence of both Spanish and American styles could be observed in the work of Nick Cocaine, where his flashback technique was highly appreciated by critics. Some writers attempted to incorporate a taste of folk tradition, especially in the poetry such as epic and other oral forms of literature, which still existed like Balagtasan. However, oral tradition became less popular as people became more interested in short stories. The 21st century literature, it is sometimes called the contemporary literature. It is viewed as a literature of the new generation. Specifically, this refers to literary pieces or diverse post-millennial texts that have been produced since 2000 to 2001 up to the present. The shift from paper to the screen first took place in this type of literature, and the use of technology for human expression such as ebook, blog, digifiction has been very common. What are the characteristics of the 21st century literature? It is written by contemporary authors within the last decade. It deals with the current issues and themes. It reflects technological culture. It's the literature of emerging genres, and it often breaks traditional writing. How the novel gave way to short stories as life became busier and more fast-paced with the Industrial Revolution in the Western world would explain the emergence of new genres which complemented dependence on the internet and the gadgets that required to access them. The 21st century learners were born with a computer already as a part of the daily life essential. Some literary genres which the computer and internet help create are the following. Blog. This is also known as a weblog or website containing short articles called posts that are changed regularly. Some blogs are written by one person containing their own opinions, interests, experiences, while others are written by many different people. Next, literary genres, chick lit. Okay, chick lit, this is genre is fiction that addresses issues of modern womanhood, often humorously and lightheartedly. The genre became popular with late 1990s with chick lit titles topping bestseller lists and the creation of impacts devoted entirely to chick lit. Flash fiction. This is characterized with a style of fictional literature or fiction of extreme brevity. There is no widely accepted definition on the length of category. Creative nonfiction, also known as a literary nonfiction or narrative nonfiction. It is a genre of writing that uses literary styles and techniques to create factually accurate narratives. Next, mobile phone textula. A particular example of this is a poem Tanaga. It is a type of Filipino poem consisting 4 lines with 7 syllables, each with the same rhyme, and at the end of each line, that is to say, a 7777 syllabic verse with an AABB rhyme scheme. So now let's go to remembering the greatness of our Filipino writers. So I want you to search for some of the prestigious literary awards and competitions in the Philippines during the contemporary period. I want you to choose one awardee in literature and write an editorial to commemorate his or her significant contributions to our nation's literary identity. Use a separate sheet for this activity. Refer to the rubric in writing an editorial by One World Education Incorporated, which you can access through its website, www.oneworldeducation.org. So the pictures here are the famous Filipino writers you can choose to. So that's all for today, and thank you. God bless us all.